Welcome to the ICRP International Conference on Recovery After Nuclear Accidents, Radiological Protection Lessons from Fukushima and Beyond. I'm Christopher Clement, Scientific Secretary of ICRP, the International Commission on Radiological Protection, and Chair of the Core Planning Group for this conference. My co-chair for this opening session is Shunichi Yamashita, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for nearly a decade now. He played a very important role in recovery in Fukushima, and I'm honored that he's agreed to be chair of this conference. In the next session, you'll meet Yasuhiro Uezu of Japan Atomic Energy Agency, JAEA, chair of the Logistics Committee, and later you'll meet ICRP Vice Chair Jacques Lachard, chair of the Program Committee. I also want to acknowledge the very hard work of Charlotte White, new to the ICRP Scientific Secretariat this year and essential to making this conference virtual. Special thanks go to Hiroki Fujita, on loan from JAEA to ICRP in the position of ICRP Assistant Scientific Secretary. He's a key link between our two organizations, and in fact, between ICRP and Japan, and he's played a central coordinating role for this conference. He's put in an enormous effort to ensure its success. Relating to this, I encourage you to watch the special video presentation of Akira Endo, who explores the long-standing and strengthening connection between ICRP and JAEA that has brought us to this moment. Let me mention a few details about this virtual conference. You'll see in the program that we have a series of scheduled sessions like this one, running from the 1st to the 4th of December. They'll be live streamed at the scheduled times and viewable on demand afterwards. The live streamed presentations or sessions will be a combination of live presentations and pre-recorded videos to accommodate the challenges of time differences for many participants. You may be interested to know that we chose Japan Standard Time to plan the scheduled sessions because JAEA has kindly arranged local viewing centers in Fukushima Prefecture so people without adequate internet access can participate. I especially welcome those of you who took the time to travel to one of these centers to be here. We have nearly 100 complimentary presentations in addition to the scheduled sessions in the form of videos, PDF posters, and papers. These effectively replace the poster session that we would have had at a physical conference, with the advantage of being more versatile. You can see them all listed on the complimentary presentation section of the conference website, and some are also linked to the scheduled sessions. It will be possible for those watching the live sessions to submit written questions during the session. The speakers will answer what they can, time permitting, but it's unlikely we'll get to all of the questions in each session. So it's also possible to ask questions after each live stream session and also related to each of the complimentary presentations that are on demand, using the tools on the conference website. This Q&A will stay active until the 11th of December, so there'll be time to have interactions between speakers and attendees. Although I am disappointed that we could not hold this conference in Fukushima Prefecture as planned, I'm very pleased that going online has made this important event accessible to a much wider audience. More than 2,000 people from more than 100 countries have registered for this conference. However, one important feature we had to change was the planned site visits. We've done our best to recreate the experience by making videos and other materials available on the conference website. Although not the same as being there, they at least give you a glimpse of the enormous recovery efforts still going on in Fukushima in Japan. Now, please let me give the floor to Yamashita Sensei to make a few remarks and then introduce the few speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for your kind introduction of this epoch-making joint international conference organized by ICRP and JAEA with support from many other organizations. Your overview of all the important topics and items to be covered over the next 4 days makes my job easier. I'm Shunichi Yamashita, currently a Vice President of Fukushima Medical University and Director General of the Center for Advanced Radiation Emergency Medicine at the National Institute for Quantum and Radiological Science and Technology, Japan. On behalf of the Japanese side, we really appreciate all the support and cooperation from domestic and international counterparts and stakeholders, beginning immediately after the Great East Japan earthquake, its huge tsunami, and the nuclear power plant crisis that pose ongoing challenges. Japan's painful and difficult long-term recovery from this compound disaster included evacuation orders and many uncertainties about when and how people could return to their homeland in the Hamadori area of Fukushima. Among the domestic and international supporters who have come to Fukushima on these special occasions, we should especially acknowledge ICRP's great contributions as well as JEA's support and their application of credible scientific and regulatory approaches using consensus-based ICRP recommendation reports. Those estimates and reference levels published before and just after the Fukushima accident were immediately informative and have enduring value for our recovery efforts. In response to the accident, ICRP task group revisited various radiological protection issues. Emerging from those important task group was the ICRP Dialogue Initiative in Fukushima, which has applied what had been identified after the Chernobyl accident, namely the very strong concern for health, particularly the health of children. Secondly, the overall well-being of affected people is at stake, and radiological protection must focus on rehabilitation of their living and working conditions. Now, going back to the program that came together through much international and interdisciplinary consultation, its many important and diverse topics are well characterized and will be presented by world-renowned experts applying not only evidence-based analysis of the accident, but also lessons learned from much on-site experience. In the first session, the two co-organizers will present their welcome addresses. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Clara Kazum, the chair of ICRP. Please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone who is joining this conference. My name is Dr. Claire Cousins, and I'm the chair of ICRP from Cambridge in the UK. I have been the chair of ICRP for the last 12 years and have been a member of ICRP since 2001. This virtual conference is a first for ICRP. I'm delighted that we have so many participants who are able to join us. I'd also like to extend a very big thank you to our hosts, JAEA, and all the other Japanese and international supporters who have made this conference possible. Particular thanks go to the Ministry of Environment, the MOE in Japan, the Institute for Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety, IRSN in France, and the Radiation Effects Association, REA in Japan. In addition, I have to give a special thanks to the ICRP Secretariat, who have worked tirelessly to transform this from a physical to a virtual meeting. As well as our main host and sponsors, there have been many other cooperating organisations. And again, a big thank you to you all for supporting this conference. The tragic event of April 1986 with the Chernobyl accident, of course, changed the former USSR. and the events of the 11th of March 2011 changed Japan. These events, of course, had a profound repercussions around the world for many organisations and for ICRP. Being honest, it took ICRP quite a time to integrate the lessons of the Chernobyl accident, because our publications 109 on the protection of people in emergency exposure situations and publication 111, the protection of people living in long-term contaminated areas after nuclear accidents and radiological emergencies, were both only published in 2009. So it took over 20 years before our lessons became incorporated into a publication. So what about ICRP and Fukushima? We like to think that we reacted rather more promptly and in a more concrete way after the 2011 accident. One of the first things ICRP did was send an early letter of sympathy to the people of Japan. And we have sent anniversary messages following this. Task Group 84, a task group of the main commission, was established soon after the accident, and this was led by the then Vice Chair Abel Gonzalez, to really compile the first lessons that we may learn from the accident related to our system of radiological protection. A few months later, in autumn 2011, ICRP commenced its dialogue initiative. It was really only a couple of years after the accident that ICRP realised the publications 109 and 11 really already would need to be updated in light of experience gained from the Fukushima accident, and hence Task Group 93 was launched. I'd also like to mention the Fukushima dialogue. Altogether, this has consisted of 22 seminars. It's brought together local experts, international experts, authorities, people from local communities and beyond, and many individual citizens who needed to discuss relevant issues. There's really quite a big commitment, and its success has been due to the dedication of several individuals from ICRP, particularly Jacques Lechard, the Vice Chair of ICRP, Otsura Niwa, who was a main commission member at the time, Chris Clement, our scientific secretary, and the various ICRP assistant secretaries who've been working with us from Japan. And of course, the input of the Japanese people has been absolutely crucial. Nearly a decade after the accident, the dialogue seminars are now in the hands of the non-profit organisation, the Fukushima Dialogue. ICRP has stepped back somewhat from its involvement, but has certainly not abandoned the dialogue. This is now led by its president, Ryoko Ando, a lady who has been very enthusiastically involved from the very start of the dialogues. The various lessons that we've learned through the dialogues and elsewhere have been reflected in the work of Task Group 93. And this is now going to be publication 146 on radiological protection of people and the environment in the event of a large nuclear accident. So why are we having a recovery conference at this time? Well, because even a decade after the Fukushima accident, ICRP and others realised that, of course, the story is not finished. We and many other organisations still have very much to learn, and I think we have much to contribute. The dialogues may now be organised by local people, as appropriately so, but ICRP is committed to continuing assisting those that have been affected. At a time when the world is being engulfed by the COVID pandemic, ICRP hopes that this conference will aid the recognition of the challenges that still face many residents of Fukushima. So the conference has various objectives. We would of course like to share experiences from the accident, both Fukushima and the Chernobyl accidents and other events, to enhance our understanding of the current state of recovery in Japan. We want people to consider strategies that may still be necessary to aid the recovery process. 9 years later is still not too late to do so. And also from this, we hope that there will be improved preparedness for recovery from any possible future major nuclear accident should it occur. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kodama from the Japan Atomic Energy Agency. At the outset of the International Conference on Recovery After the Nuclear Accident, co-hosted by ICRP, I would like to extend my greeting to all of you. ICRP is the international organization for issuing the recommendation for the radiation protection. It is a group of the specialists. Right after that, March 11th of the 2011, that the TEPCO's the Fukushima #1 nuclear accident, they issued a statement. And also within the Fukushima prefecture, more than 20 dialogues was posted by ICRP, has been implemented. The policy, which is very close to local people, on behalf of the organization in Japan, specialist organization in Japan, I would like to state my gratitude. Nearly 10 years has passed since that Fukushima #1 accident. The JAEA, right after the accident, conducted the monitoring and evaluation of the radiation. And this time, that the JAEA is a host of the international conference, together with the ICRP, and prepared the forum for exchanging the opinions and information in the past. In the past 10 years, that within the Fukushima prefecture, many of the areas saw the lifting of the evacuation order, and also TEPCO's nuclear plant of the TEPCO Fukushima #1 is stabilized, and therefore that there have been very significant progress toward the recovery. Having said so, however, that there are still the hard-to-return areas, and also that even though that evacuation orders are lifted, not many people are coming back. And also that it takes a lot of time for decommission of the #1 reactor. And turning our eyes to the international community, not too many people are understanding the status of the recovery in Japan. At the convening of the international conference, at one time that we considered the postponing because of the COVID-19, but nonetheless, that we decided to conduct this conference on the online basis and within the new lifestyle. And this can be the model of the organizing the international conference, can be the model for the organizing and implementing the international conference into the future. We are expecting about 300 participants, but 1,500 registered. So this is the welcome, that the phenomena, because that many people are interested in the recovery of Fukushima, and also that the influence of the ICRP, and also online conference is very user-friendly and welcomed by the participants. At the international conference, Japanese government, Fukushima prefecture, and also the local governments, universities, and research institutes, and academic organizations, manufacturers have been supporting us significantly. And with this, I would like to express my gratitude, and for the prayer of the sincere prayer for the success of the conference, I would like to close my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you,
ク
Chris.
リス、紹介ありがとうございます。
There was a
先ほど
technical
機
problem,
器のトラブルがございましたけども、こ
so,
ういった
but it's
オン
great.
ラインで会議が行えるというのは、
まあ
世界中の多くの
It's sort of a demerit,
世
but
界中の
also
多くの方
it
々に
enables many
参
people
加していた
around the
だいて、
world to
この講演を聞
participate
いてい
in
た
this
だけることを
conference.
大変
We are
光栄に思いま
delighted.
す。先ほど
ICRP's
ICRP のクレア・カズン委員長がご
committee
紹介しま
chairman
したように、
Claire Cousins has
ICRP は
made an address.
福島事故に際しま
So
して、
ICRP
さまざまな
has
活動を行ってまいりました。
come up
その
with
一つ
many
が、タスク
recommendations
グループ
for
を設置
recovery.
して、
One is to
原
set
子
up
力事
a
故後の
task
放
force
出船防護に関する
and also to
勧告を
revise
改定することでございました。
recommendations.
その刊行物が、
And
近々
recent,
に近々
soon,
刊
that
行
kind of
発行されます。
recommendation will
本
be
日は
published.
本日は、
So
その
today
中で
I'm going
復
to
旧
talk
に関
about
する
the
部分を
ICRP recommendations
行い
for
たいと
recovery.
思います。この
This
刊行物は
publication
ICRP
is
パブリケーション
ICRP publication
146として近々
146.
刊
It will
行
be
されま
published
す。
soon.
このパブリケーションは
This
大規
publication
模原子力事故にお
is
ける
radiological
人と
protection of
環境
people
の
and
放
the
射線防護に
environment
関
in
す
the
る勧
event
告
of
です。
large nuclear accident.
これまでは
So far,
ICRP がパブリケーション
ICRP has
109と
published publications
111を刊
109
告
and
しておりましたが、
111.
これは
These
福島
publications
事故
were
以前
made
に
before the
作成された
Fukushima
ものでしたの
accident.
で、ICRP とし
So
ましては、福島事故の
with
教
the
訓を受け、
lessons learned from
改定を行っ
Fukushima,
た
they
レ
have
ポ
come
ート
up
で
with
ござい
this
ま
new
す。
publication.
このレポー
For
トのために
publishing this
2013年に
publication,
ICRP がタスクグル
ICRP
ープを設
has
置し、
set up a task
昨
force
年
in
2019
2013,
年までに
and
会
we
合
have
を重ね、
had many
そ
meetings.
の成果をパブリッ
And
クコメン
the
コンサルテーションと
fruit
して
was
昨
published
年度
as
公
a
表いたしました。
consultation
さら
published
に、
last year. And we
多くの
received
コメント
even
を受けまし
more
て、
comments.
さらには ICRP
And
の
we
中で
have
の
made
議論を経まして、
discussions
最
and
終的なレポートの
completed
完成
the
に至り
report.
ました。
So I'd like
全
to
体の
show
構
you the
成をご紹
structure
介し
of
ま
this
す。
publication.
本文が
So we
一
have
般的
general
事項、早
considerations
期と中
and
期段階、
the
長
early
期段
and
階、
intermediate phase,
大規
the
模原
long-term
子力
phase,
事故への備えの
preparedness, planning,
6章
and
から構
conclusion.
成さ
So
れています。
6 chapters altogether.
第2章
In
では
chapter 2,
大
it
規模
talks
な
about
原子力事
timeline
故
for
の時
managing
間
a
軸につい
nuclear
て、
accident
それから
and
その他のその潜在
consequences
的
of
な放
large
出線の
nuclear
影響について、
accidents, and also
放出線
the
以外の影響
principles
に
of
関する事故につい
protection
て、
of
さ
people
らに
and
は
the
人と環
environment.
境の保護のための原則に関する一般的事項についてを述べています。
In chapter 3,
第
they
3
talk
章で
about
は
the early
早期
and
段階と中
intermediate
期段階に
phases
適用される委員会の勧告に
recommendations
つ
for
いて
these
述
two
べています。
stages. And in chapter
4章
4,
では
they talk
長期
about
段階
the
に適用
recommendations
される
for
勧告に
long-term
ついて
phase.
述べております。
And
第5章では
in
将来の事故への
chapter
備えとして
5,
防災計画
they
の簡
talk
単な
about
概要を示し、第6章では
and in
結論を
chapter
述
6,
べ
they
て
talk
おりま
about the
す。
long-term conclusions. Sorry.
付属にはチェルノブイリと福島に
And
関する
in
事故後
the
の放出
annex,
線防護に
they
関す
have
る
the
記述が
Chernobyl
述
nuclear
べられており
accident
ま
and
す。
Fukushima nuclear accident.
このスライドは原子力事故に
And
対応するため
talks
の
about
タイムライ
a
ン、時間
timeline
軸について述べたものでございます。
After the
事故が
accident,
発生しますと、事
there
故の
needs to
早
be
期段
managing a
階、
large
さらに
nuclear
は中期段
accident.
階、それ
And
から
we
長期
have
の
three
3つの段
phases,
階に区
early
分するこ
phase,
とが適切
intermediate,
と
and
ICRP は
long-term
考えま
phase.
した。この3つの
And
段
for
階に
each
それぞれ保全防護システムの実施にあたって、早期と中期段階については緊急被爆状況とみな
deem
し、
the early and
長期段
intermediate
階
as
は
emergency
現存被爆状況
exposure, and
という
for
ふうに考えま
long
した。
term, we deem it as existing
さらに
exposure
は、ある
situation.
段階から次の段階の移行は、多くの要因
Movement
に依
from
存し
one
て決
phase to
定
the
されな
other
ければ
must
な
be
りません。
decided on many factors.
一般的には、 行政当局
And
の
it
公
is
式な
usually
宣言によっ
accompanied
て
by
正式に
the
決定されます。
official statement by
緊
the
急被爆状況
authorities.
から
So
現存被
from
爆状
emergency
況への移
exposure
行
to
は
existing
す
exposure
べての影響を
situation,
受けた地域で同時に行
it does
われる
not
とは限らないこ
occur
とに
in all
注意する
areas
必要
at
がご
one
ざいま
time.
す。
A large
大規模
nuclear
原子力事故の
accident,
影響
these
の
are the
特徴を
features.
述べます。原子力事故の
So
影
there
響
is
では
usually
通常放射線からの
radiation,
直
the
接的な影
direct
響が
effect
注
of
目されます。
radiation in large
しか
nuclear
し
accidents.
大規模原子力事故の場合には
But it is
個
also
人や
affecting
地域社会の
individual
生
and
活の
community life,
あらゆ
all
る側面に
aspects
影
of
響を与えます。その
individual
結
and
果、社会の
community
崩
life.
壊を引き起
And
こ
as
し、
a result,
社会的、
it has
環境
large
的、
and long
経
lasting
済的にも
societal,
大きく
environmental,
長期
and
的な影響を
economical
及ぼす可能性があります。
consequences.
放射線
And
からの
besides the
健康影響以外にも
radiation-induced health
動
effects,
植物
there are
の影響や
consequences for
社
fauna
会
and
的影響、
flora,
経済
societal,
的影響、
economic,
心理学的
psychological
影響、
consequences,
さ
and
らには
also health
防護対
impacts
策が取ら
of
れることで
changes in
生活スタイルが
lifestyle
変わることによる
associated with
健康影
protective
響にも
actions.
注目しなければなりません。
And the
放射線防
objective
護の
of
目的は
radiological
正当
protection
化と
are
最適
achieved
化の基本
using the
原則を用い
fundamental
て達成
principles
され
of
ます。
justification and
正当化
optimization.
の原則は
The principle of
防護措置の実
justification
施に関する
ensures
決定が
that
重
decisions
大な混
regarding
乱
the
を引き起こす可能性が
implementation
あります。
protective measures
そのた
result
め
in a
影
benefit
響を受ける人や
to the
環
affected
境に
people and
利
the
益をもたら
environment,
すことを
as these
保障
actions
する
can
ものでなけれ
potentially
ばなりま
induce
せん。
significant disruption.
防護の
The
最適
principle
化の
of
原則は
optimization of
最適
protection
化、
is
参考レベル
applied
を用い
with
て行わ
reference
れます。
levels.
ここでは
Here,
個々の被爆の分布における
we
不公平さを
to
制限
maintain
し、
or reduce
社
all
会的、
exposures
環
to as
境的
low
およ
as
び経済
reasonably
的要因を考慮に入れて、
achievable,
すべて
taking
の被
into
爆を合理
account
的に
societal,
達成可能な限り
environmental,
低く
and
維持、
economic
または
factors.
減少させることを目的としています。
Justification
正
and
当化と最適化は
optimizations are applied
事故のすべて
in
の
the
段階におい
mitigation
て
of radiological
人と
consequences to
環境への
people and
放射線
environment
影
during
響の
all
緩和の
phases
た
of
め
the
に適用
accident
されます。
and should take careful
適切な
account
生
of
活と
all
生計を含め
non-radiological
影響を受け
factors
たすべての
in
人々
order
の
to preserve
生
or
活と作
restore
業条
the
件を
living and
維持
working
または回
conditions
復する
of
ために
all those
放
affected,
射線以外のすべて
including
の要因を
decent
慎重に
lifestyles and
考慮しなけれ
livelihoods.
ばなりません。計画被爆状況に適用さ
The
れま
application
す
of
線
those
量限
limits
度は
is
事
not
故後の緊急
appropriate
被爆状
in
況や
emergency
現
and
存被爆状況
existing
に
exposure
適用するこ
situations
とは適
following an
切ではありません。
accident.
線量限度は計画的に放射線
So it
放射
must
線
be
源が導入
introduced
され、
in a planned
被
manner
爆が完
to
全に管理
manage
され、規制
in a
されている
managed
場合の
manner.
み適
That
用
is
するもの
only
で
that
あり
is
ます。
the condition for applying this.
ICRP
The
は
Commission has
経験に基
defined
づいて
reference
放射
levels
線
to
の
be
リスクと
selected
管理
with
の実現
genetic
可能性を
bands
考慮
of
して
exposure
1、20、100の
considering the
バンドの
induced
範囲内
risk
で
of
選
radiation
択される
as well
参
as
考レベルを
feasibility of
明
controlling
示
the
しております。
situation. Responsibility for making decisions on the justification of protection is usually the role of authorities and
その目
responsible
的は
organizations.
講義の意味で
The
は
aim
社
is
会
to
全体の
ensure
利
an
益を
overall
確保する
benefit
ことであり、
in the
必
broadest
ずしも
sense
個々の個
to
人に対して
society
ではあり
and
ませ
not
ん。
necessarily to each
保護対策
individual.
の決定の正当化には、
There are many
行
aspects
政
of
当局以外の組
justification
織
of
や
decisions that
個
can be
人が有益な
usefully
状況、
informed
情
by
報を提供している
organizations or
面がたく
individuals
さんあります。
outside the authorities.
可能な
Therefore,
限り、
the Commission
保護対策の
recommends
決定の正当化
involving
のプロセスに
key
は、
stakeholders
主要
in
な
public
ステークホルダー
processes
を
for
参
the
加させることを
justification of
勧
decisions
告しています。
whenever possible.
事故に起因する
The
全
Commission
体的な状
considers
況の変化
that
に応じて、
justification of
決
decisions
定
should
の
be
正当性を
reassessed
定期的に
regularly
再評価する
as
こ
the
とが大切
overall
です。
situation resulting
正
from
当化
an
は
accident
保護
evolves.
対策の
Therefore,
計画段階
justification
や
is
事
not
故
a
に対応している
one-off
ときに行われる
consideration
その場
taken
限りの検討であってはなりません。
during planning
正
or
当化は
during
す
the
でに行われ
management
た
of
決定
accident.
が
it should
講義
be
の意味で害より
questioned
も有益な
whether
ものであり続けてい
it
るか
should
どうかを
question whether
問う
the
ものでなけ
decisions
ればなり
already
ません。
taken continue to do so
人々
more
が
good than
被災地で
harm
生活
in
す
the
ることを
broadest
認める決定
sense.
は事故後
So
の
whether
最
to
も重要な
return
決定の一つ
or
です。
to the
そのために
original
必要な
home
条件
is
であ
one
る
of the
特に潜在的
important
な健康影
decisions.
響からの防護、
So radiation
持続可能な
protection
生活
and
と生計を
sustainable
含むために
livelihood
生活
is
や作業条
important.
件の達成が適切に満たされた場合のみ行われるべきであります。意思決定プロ
In
セス
order
を
to
改善する
improve
ために
the
ステー
decision-making
クホルダー、
process,
特に
the
地方自治体
stakeholders,
の
the
代
local
表者や
government
専門家、
experts,
被
and
災
the
地の住民、
residents,
これらを
they
意思
must
決
be
定に関与
involved
さ
in
せることが
decision-making.
重要であります。防護の最適化は
Optimization of
特定の
protection
状
is a
況に応じ
process
て
that
最
requires
善の
good
防護対策
understanding
を
of
選
the
択するため
exposure
に
situation
被爆状
and the
況と
relevant
それにそ
radiological
れを特徴づける
information
放
and
射線に
data
関する情報や
characterizing
デ
this
ータを
situation
十分
in
に理
order
解す
to
る
choose the best
理解をするこ
protective
とを必要とす
actions
るプロセ
given the
スで
particular
あると言えます。
circumstances.
最適化においてステー
So
ク
it
ホ
should
ルダ
reflect
ー
the
の意見や
views
関
and
心事、
concerns of
さらに
stakeholders
は放射線防護
and
を
the
規定
ethical
する
values that
倫理的
govern
価値観を反映
radiological
させなければなり
protection.
ません。
Prudence, justice,
慎重
equity,
さ、
and
正義、
dignity
公平
are
性、尊
universal
厳は
core ethical
放射線
values
防護のシス
that
テムにおいて大
underline the
切であり、
system of
特に
radiological
最適化
protection,
原則の根底にある
particularly the
普遍的で
optimization
中核的な倫理的価値観に
principle.
配慮する必要があります。最適化プロセスは必然的にステークホルダー間の利害の対立に対処しなければならないことがあります。この場合、ステークホルダーの異なる期待とニーズを和解させようとしなければなりません。事故時の放射線被曝の特徴の一つは、線量の広がりが大きいことであります。線量の広がりが大きいことであります。事故の影響を受けた個人のごく一部の人には、被爆線量はより重大であるかもしれません。影響を受けた人々のあるグループでは、被爆線量の公平性に特に注意を払う必要があります。被爆線量の公平性に特に注意を払う必要があります。最も被爆した個人の被爆線量を減らすことを優先すべきであります。被爆線量を減らすことを優先すべきであります。参考レベルは最適化のツールとして使用するものです。最適化のツールとしてスライドに示しましたグラフの横軸は線量レベル、個人の線量レベル。縦軸はその線量を受ける人の人数を表しています。線量を受ける人の人数を表しています。あらかじめ設定した参考レベルを最初は超える人が超える人々がいる可能性が予想されます。超える人々がいる可能性が予想されます。優先すべきは最も高い被爆を受けている人を特定し、その被爆を防止または低減することです。その被爆を防止または低減することです。次に、参考レベル以上の被爆を受ける人々の数を全身的に減少させる必要があります。全身的にさらに状況が進展して、線量分布が低い方向に変化したときには、参考レベルを再評価することが望ましいと ICRP は考えています。図のように、時間とともに参考レベルを目安に線量の高い人に注目しながら線量の低減を図っていくことで、徐々に線量分布は変化していきます。このような役目として参考レベルを使用します。このような役目として線量限度のような基準とは違います。線量限度のような基準とは違います。長期段階におきましては、オンサイトの対応者、放射線作業者など事故に関わった人たちを対応者と呼びますけれども、オンサイトの対応者の防護のためには、長期段階では参考レベルは年間20ミリシーベルトを超えてはなりません。オフサイトの対応者の防護のためには、長期段階では参考レベルは刊行されている年間1ミリから20ミリのバンドの下半分の範囲内で選択されるべきであると考えています。報酬を防護するためには、 長期段階では、参考レベルは集団における実際の線量分布や被爆状況に影響を与える社会的、環境及び経済的要因を考
For the
慮し
long-term
環境
phase, the
及び
reference
経済
level
的
should be
要因を考
selected
慮して
in the lower half
年
of the
間1から
recommended
20
band
という
of
現存
1
被
to
爆状況に
20
勧告されてい
millisievert
る
per year
バ
for
ンドの
existing
下
exposure
半分の範囲
situations,
で
taking
選
into
択される
account
べ
the
きであると
actual
考えています
doses.
防護の
The objective
最適化の
of
目標は
optimization of
バンド
protection
の
is a
下端に向
progressive
かって下の
reduction
方に向かっ
in
て
exposure
可
to
能であれば
levels
そ
towards
れ
the
以下のレベル
lower
ま
end
で
of the
被
band
爆を全身
or
的に徐
below
々
if
に
possible.
減少させることであります。参考レベルの選択プロセスは
The
参
Commission
考レベルの選
reiterates
択
the
プロセスは
process for selecting the
社会生
reference
活や
level should be
経
result
済
of
活
a
動の持
careful
続可能
balance
性、
of many
環境の質な
interrelated
ど
factors,
多くの
including
相互に関連
sustainability
す
of
る要
social
因の
life and
慎
economic
重なバランス
activities,
の上に成り
as
立つ
well
べきで
as
す。
the quality of the
その
environment,
ため、
and
す
should
べてに
appropriately
すべての
reflect
関
the
連
views
するス
of
テークホル
all
ダーの意見
relevant
を
stakeholders.
適切に反映すべきであります。
Depending on the accident
事故の状況にもよりま
scenario,
すが、
this could
汚
take
染された
several
地域で
years or
生活し
even
たり、
decades
働いたり、
because exposure
働い
of
たりする人々
people
の被爆
living
は、
and
その
working
人の
in
習慣や
contaminated
生
areas
活環境に
largely
大きく依存
depend
します。
on their
そのために
and living
厳密に管理
conditions
すること
which
が
cannot be
できません。
strictly controlled. It is
またその
therefore
ために
not
こういう
possible
状
to
況が数
guarantee
年
that
ある
all
いは数十
individual
年かかる
doses
可
will
能
be
性もあり
kept
ます。
low, below
した
the
がって
reference level
長
in
期
the
的
long
に
term.
すべての個々の線量が参考レベル以下に保たれることを保証することは不可能と言えるでしょう。
Selection of reference
長期
level
段階における
to manage
長期段階における
and phase is
参
a
考レベルの
complex
選択は
decision that
社
should be
会的、
informed
倫理的
by
価値判断に基
societal
づい
and
た
ethical
複雑な
value
判断となる
judgments.
でしょう。
Due to this
そのため、
complexity, the
このような
Commission
複雑な
recommends
複雑さ
that
の下で
stakeholders who
参
will
考
be
レベルを選択する
confronted
には
with the situation
状況
should
に
be
直面する
involved
であろう
as much as
ステーク
possible
ホルダー
when
の可能な
selecting
限
the
り関与
value
すべきであ
of
る
the
と
reference
考え
level.
ております。緊急状況の中期段階から
Protective
緊急状況
actions
の中期段
implemented
階から
during the
復
early
旧
and
期に相当し
intermediate
ます
phases
長期
should
段
be
階への移行
lifted,
について説明します。
adapted, or
防護対策は
complemented
行
when
政当局
authorities
及び
and
ステークホルダーが期
stakeholders
待された効果
consider
を
that these
達成した
actions
と
have
判断した場合
achieved
に解
their
除されます。
expected effect,
また
or
は
when their
防護対
continued
策の継
application
続
is
的
no
な適用
longer
が
justified.
正当化されなくなった場合にも解除されます。
Decisions on
避難
allowing
あるい
those
は
who
一時
have
的に移
been
転した人々
temporarily
が
relocated
自
to
宅に戻
return
る
to
こと
their
を許可する
homes
かどうかの決定
involve
に
an
は
extensive
事故で
dialogue
影響を受けた
with
人
the
々と
affected people
その
and
コ
the
ミュニティの行
authorities
政
and
当局や専
professionals
門家と
in their
の
communities.
広範な対話が必要であります。
The Commission
自分の
emphasizes
将来
that
について決定
individuals
す
have
る
a basic
基本
right
的
to
な権利を持
decide
っている
about
の
their
は
future.
個人であることを強
All
調したいと思い
individual
ます。
decisions
自
about
主避難
whether
者を
to
含め
remain in
被災
or
地にとどまる
leave
か
an
離れるか
affected area
家に
or
帰るか
to
帰らないかに
return
関する
home or not,
すべての個人の
including
決
those
定
of
は
voluntary
尊厳の
evacuees,
問題
should
と
be
して
respected as a
尊重
matter
され
of
るべきでありま
dignities.
す。少なく
The
とも
decisions by
下記の
authorities to
条
allow
件と
people
手
to
段が
live
満たされている場合
permanently
には
should be taken
被
in
災地に永
close
住することを
consultation
許可
with
するための行
representatives
政
of
当局
local
の決定で
communities
は
and
地域
all
社会の
other
代表者や
stakeholders.
その他すべてのステークホルダーと緊密に協議して行われるべきであります。一つ目
Characterization
は
of
影響を受け
radiological
た地域の
situation
環
of
境、食料
environment,
品、物資、
foodstuffs,
人々の
goods,
放出船
and
状況の
people.
把握が十分に行われていることです。
Mechanisms
二
are
つ目は、意
established
思決
for
定プロセスに
involvement
ス
of
テークホル
local
ダーが関与するた
stakeholders
め
in
のメカニズムが
decision-making
確立
processes.
されていることです。
Third, a
三つ目
system
は、
for
環境
radiological
の
monitoring
放
of
出船モニタリングや
environment and measurement of
個々の外部被
individual
爆線量、内
external
爆
and
線量を
internal
測定するた
doses
めのシス
has
テム、
been
さ
established
らには健
and
康サーベイラ
as
ンス
well
シス
as
テムが
health
それぞれ
surveillance system.
確立されていることです。
Fourth,
四
appropriate
つ目は、
mechanisms
地方自治
have
体や
been
専門家の支援を
put
受け
in
て、
place to
地域社会にお
involve
ける
affected
生活の
people
質を向上
in
させるため
improving
に、
their
適切なメ
well-being
カニズ
in
ム
the,
が設
and
置さ
the
れていること
quality
で
of
す。
life.
このメカニズムには
Later, I will talk about this
後で後ほ
mechanism.
ど説明します
There's
共同
also
専門知プロセスがあ
co-expertise
ります。
process. I'll explain later.
復旧期である
So
復旧期
now,
である
long-term
長期段
phase
階の放射線防護の特徴
radiological
について
protection.
説明いたします。社会的に混乱をもたらしている原子力事故で
In the
は、
long-term
長期的
phase,
な段階においては、
we need
防護の原則と基準だけ
not
に基づいた
just
管理で
the
は、被災地の
radiological
個人や
principles and
コミュニティが
criteria
直面する課題に
that's not
対応するには
sufficient
十
to
分ではありま
respond
せん。
to the challenges
これは
faced
チ
by
ェルノブイリ
individuals
や
and
福島事故
communities
か
in
ら
the
の教
affected
訓でもあり
area.
ます。
We've learned this from Chernobyl and Fukushima accidents.
放射線防護の原則や基準
While
は、
radiological
長期
principles
的な
and
フェーズの管理に不
criteria
可欠なイ
are
ン
an
プットではあ
essential
ります
input
が、
to the
それでも
management of
被
the
災した個
long-term
人や
phase,
コ
they
ミュニ
should
ティの
be
生活
used
や終了状況
appropriately
の回
and
復に
with
伴
due
って
flexibility
適切
for
かつ
accompanying the
柔軟に
rehabilitation
利用
of the
される
living
必
and
要がありま
working
す。
conditions of affected
住民に対し
individuals and
て自ら
communities.
を守る方法および防護を効果的に実施するために
And
条
it
件、
is the
手段、
government's
資源について
responsibility to
そ
provide
れらに関
relevant
連するガイドライ
guidelines
ンを
to the
提供
population
するこ
on
と
how
は
to
政
protect
府の
themselves
責
and
任でありま
conditions
す。
and means and resources for implementing this effectively.
復
Now,
旧期である
protection
長
of
期段階の事
responders
故後の作
during the
業に従事する
long-term
対応者の
phase.
放射線防護について説明し
The
ます。
aim on site
オン
is
サイトでは破損し
to
た設備の解
dismantle the
体、廃棄
damaged
物の管理が行
installation,
われます。
including
被爆
management
状
of
況はほとんど
corresponding
明らかに
waste.
なってお
The
り、
exposure
発生
situation
源は
is
ほとんど
mainly
管理されるこ
characterized
とでしょ
and
う。
the source
しか
is
し、
mostly under
技術的
control.
な困難が残
Although
っておりま
some
す。
technical
不測の事
difficulties
態が
may
いつでも
remain
発生
and
する可能性
unforced
があると
situations may
考
occur
えておく
at
必
any
要がありま
time.
す。
Circumstances
オ
on
ンサイトの
site
状況にお
may
いては、
require planning
参考レベ
for
ルよりも
exposures higher than the
高い被爆
reference
線量
level.
を想定した計画が必要に
In
なるか
that
もしれませ
case,
ん。
the Commission
そ
recommends
の場合、
special
期間を
arrangements
限定し
limited
た
in
特
time,
別な取り
which
決め
should
をし
be
て、
prepared with
細
the
心の
greatest
注意を
care
払って準備す
after
べきです。
deliberation between concerned parties.
オフサ
The
イトでは、
exposure of these
住民
residents
自身を
should be
含むグループ
considered
が
as public
清掃や
exposure
除染
and
作業の実施に
as public
関わるかもしれませ
exposure
ん。
and should be managed
これらの被爆
using
は
the same
公衆の被爆
principles
とみな
as
し、
for the
被
general
災地の一般住
population
民
in
と
the
同様の
affected area.
必要条件で管理すべきであると考えております。
When an
放
occupationally
射
exposed
線従事者と
worker
して
is
働いている作
involved
業者
as a
は、
responder,
緊急時の
the
対応者として
exposure
関与した場合、
received during the
緊急時に受
response
けた被
should
爆は
be accounted
計
for
画被爆
and
状況の中で
recorded
受けた被爆とは
separately
別
from
に記録
exposures
すべきであると
received
勧告いた
during
します。
planned exposure
責任当
situations.
局、事業者、雇用
Arrangement
者、
for those
労働者
records of
間の合意に基
responders
づく
based on
事故
agreement
対応
between
者の占領記
responsible
録の取り
authorities,
決めは、
operators,
事故に
employers, and
備えた段
workers
階から
should be made
事
in
故対
advance
応の計
as
画
part
の
of
一
the
部として
plan for nuclear
事前に
installation
決
accident
めてお
at
く
the
必要があります。
preparedness stage. The Commission
中期段階に
recommends that
終了したとき、
occupationally
緊急被爆
exposed
状況の
workers
中期
who
段
wish
階が
to
終了したと
return
き
to
に、
their regular
死亡
activities
する
when the intermediate phase
放
is
射線作
over
業者が
should
通常
not
の
be
仕事に
prohibited from
復帰す
doing
ること
so.
を禁止すべきではあ
The
りません。
decision should be
た
taken
だし、
by the
この決
authority
定は
responsible
事
for the
故前および
installation
事故対
on
応
a
中に受けた
case
被
by
爆の
case.
履歴を詳細に検討し、施設管理の責任当局がケースバイケースで決定を行うべきであります。復旧期である長期段階の人と環境の放射線
So
長期
management
段
of the
階の人と
protection
環
of
境の放射
people
線防
in
護に
affected
ついて説明します。中長期的な段階における被
and
災地の
long-term
中
phases
長期的な
is a
段階におけ
complex
る被災地の
process
人々の防護の管
involving
理は
not only
放射線防護
radiological
の要因だ
factors
けではなく
but
て
also
社会的、
societal,
環境、経済
environmental,
的な
and
考慮を含め
economic
て
considerations.
行われる複雑なプロセスであります。
This process
防護対
includes
策は
actions
国や地方
implemented
自
by
治体が実
national
施
and
する対
local
策だけでは
authorities
なく、
and
防護
self-help
が個人
protective
のライフス
actions
タイルに
taken
大き
by
く依存する
residents
面があり
of
ま
the
すので、
affected
被災
areas.
地の住民自身による自助努力による防護措置も含まれま
The
す。
Commission recommends that
地域での
authorities,
経
experts,
験
and
と情報を
stakeholders
共有
should
し、
cooperate
地
in the
域社会への
so-called
関与を促進し、
co-expertise process
人々が
to
十分
share
な情報に基づいた
experience
意思決
and
定が行え
inform,
るように、
promote
実践
involvement
的な放射線防護
in
文化の
local
発展が必要
communities
です。
and
共
develop
同専
a
門地プロセスに
practical
おいて、
ecological
行政当局
protection.
や専門家およびステークホルダーが協力して行う必要があることを ICRP は勧告します。共同専門地プロセスの役割についてまとめます。
I'm going to talk
の
about the
役割について
co-expertise
まとめます。
process.
専門家と地域のステークホ
This
ルダーが
process
協
of
力して行うプロセス
cooperation
は、
between
放射線
expert
状況の評価
professionals
と
and
理
local
解を深め、
stakeholders
人と
aims
環
to
境を防
share
護するため
local
の
knowledge
防
and
護対
scientific
策を検討
expertise
し、
for the
生
purpose
活と
of
作業条
assessing
件を改善
and
することを目
better
的に、
understanding
地
the
域の知識、
radiological
科学
situation,
的専門知識を
developing
共有
protective
することを
actions
目的
to
とします。
protect people
共同専
and
門地プロセス
the
は、 放
environment
射線の影響を
and
受けた個人や
improving
地域
living
社会が
and
自らの
working
身を守る
conditions.
方法を知ること
The
で、
co-expertise
原子力事故の
process
影
is
響に直面
effective
した際に
in
必要と
empowering
される
individuals and
実践的
communities
な放射線
affected by
防護文化を
radiation to know
育
how
てる上
to
で効
protect
果的と
themselves
なるで
and
しょう。
thus develop a practical
事故時
radiological
に
protection
大きく損
culture
なわれていた
needed
自
for
分
the
自身の意思
consequences
決
of
定に関
nuclear
する
accident.
自律性を
It
回
enables
復させることが
people
できるよう
to
に
restore
し
their
ます。
autonomy
さらに
regarding
人と人との
decisions
つ
that
ながりを
affect
取り
them,
戻
which
し、
has been
連
seriously
帯感
impaired
を
at the
育
time
み、
of accident.
より自
Furthermore, it
信を持って
contributes to
未来を
reconnecting
見ていく
people
機会を
to
提供す
develop
る
their
ことに
solidarity
なる
and
でしょう。
provides opportunity
この
for
よう
them
な
to
共
look
同
to
専
the
門地プロセ
future
スの
with more
例とし
confidence.
て、
For
人々が住んでい
example,
る場所、働いてい
the
る場所の占
making a
領率の
local
ローカル
map,
マップを作
the
成するこ
dose
とや、
map,
彼ら
and
自身の
also
外部被曝や内爆を
we
よりよ
can
く
also
管理する
manage
こと
the
ができるでしょう。
radiation dose. For example,
別な例で
also
は、地
monitoring
域の農
of
作物
the
などのモニタリングを
agricultural
地域コミュニティに提供すること
process
の
and
共同
to
専門地プ
provide
ロ
it
セ
to
ス
the
は、
local
自助的
community.
な防護
That
行
will
動の
also
実施
contribute.
に貢献することになるでしょう。
Now I will talk about
最
my
後に
conclusions.
結論をまとめます。
Given the
原子
complexity
力
of
事
the
故が生み出した状
situation
況の複
created
雑
by
さ
the
と
accident
その
and the
影響の
extent
大
of
きさ
its
を考えますと、
consequences,
放射線防
radiological
護は不可欠であり
protection
ます
is
が、
indispensable,
影響を受ける
but
すべて
only
の個人や
represents one
組織が
dimension of
直
the
面している問題に
contributions
対処する
that
た
are
めに
likely to
動
need
員さ
to
れる
be
必要がある
mobilized
一
to
つの
cope with
要
the
素に過ぎません。
situation. They have also
事故の
been
影響を受けた
elaborated with the
地域社会の
objective
生
of
活や
putting
作業条件、
radiological protection
生
at
活
the
の質の
service
回
of
復には
rehabilitating
放
living
射
and
線防護を
working
役立てることを
conditions
目的とし
and the
て
quality of life
ICRP
of
は
affected
勧告を策定してい
communities.
ます。
To achieve this
この
objective,
目
the
的を達成
Commission
するためには、
emphasizes
ス
the
テークホルダーの
crucial
参加が極
importance
め
of
て重要であるこ
involving
とを強調したいと
stakeholders.
思います。
Experts should
その
adopt
ために
a
は、
prudent
専門
approach
家
to
は
manage
被爆を管理
exposures,
するために
seek to
慎重なアプロー
reduce
チを採用し、
inequalities
被
in
爆の不
exposures,
公平感の
take
低
care
減
of
を図り、
vulnerable groups,
脆
and
弱な集
respect
団、
the
子どもや
individual decisions of
妊婦といっ
people
た脆弱
while
な集団に配慮
preserving
し、
the
人
autonomy
々の
of choice.
選択の自立性を維持しつつ、個々の決定を尊重すべきであります。ご清聴どうもありがとうございました。
Arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you very much, Kai Sensei, for your detailed presentation about the forthcoming publication 146. I should let you know that I should let you know that this publication we had planned to have available before the conference, but this has been a difficult year for everyone. Nonetheless, it's in press and should be available within the next few days, maybe before the conference, but I can make no promises before the conference is over, but certainly next few days. We've had a number of questions from the audience, but due to the technical difficulties earlier on, we won't take them right now. However, no need to worry. All questions that you send during this live session will be transferred to the website, and presenters will have a chance to answer them during the next few days. So please keep asking questions, even if we don't get to them in this particular live session. They will be up online soon. So our next speaker on the agenda is Gillian Hirth. She's chair of the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. And she'll be speaking to you today about the UNSCEAR efforts on levels and effects of radiation exposure due to the Fukushima accident. Please go ahead.
Good day to you all, and thank you to the ICRP for inviting UNSCEAR to be part of this important conference. As the current chair of UNSCEAR, it is a privilege and honour for me to provide an overview on the committee's work and the developments since the 2013 UNSCEAR report on the levels and effects of radiation exposure due to the Fukushima accident. UNSCEAR is a scientific committee of the United Nations and the highest authority in the UN on radiation levels and effects. Its mandate is to assess sources of exposure to radiation and their effects on health and the environment, and provides a sound basis for decisions on radiation-related issues. Its findings, for example, underpin the current international safety standards for radiation protection. UNSCEAR is composed of scientific experts nominated on the basis of scientific qualifications, experience, and expertise by 27 countries that are states members of the committee. However, it does not deal with policy matters itself, but has an important role in disseminating its findings to the UN General Assembly, the scientific community, and the public. It is now approaching 10 years since the triple tragedy, the earthquake, tsunami, and the accident at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station. I am sure that you're aware that the committee conducted a 2-year assessment of the levels and effects of radiation exposure from the accident and reported its findings to the UN General Assembly in 2013. More than 80 scientists from 18 countries worked on this report, which together with scientific annexes was published in April 2014 in English and Japanese, and the findings were shared at events in Koriyama and Fukushima City the same year. Let me recall the main conclusions of the UNSCEAR 2013 Fukushima report, which took account of information available up to October 2012. Overall, the committee expected cancer rates to remain stable. That is to say, no discernible increases in cancer rates due to radiation exposure expected. There was a theoretical and small increased risk of thyroid cancer among children, most exposed in 2011, but this was not expected to be discernible. No impact on birth and hereditary effects was expected. The doses were too low. No discernible increase in cancer rates among workers was expected, and there was a transient and geographically localized impact on wildlife. Following the publication of the 2013 report, UNSCEAR established a standing mechanism to systematically track and review new scientific information as it became available. This follow-up process saw the establishment of an expert group of scientists who tracked, screened, and systematically reviewed new literature across 5 key thematic areas listed here. The expert group examined the new material in scientific papers, journals, and research reports to identify whether this new information materially affected conclusions of the 2013 report, or if it addressed research needs identified in the 2013 report. More than 300 publications were reviewed, covering the period from December 2012 through to December 2016. The results of this follow-up work were published in the 2015, 2016, and 2017 white papers. For each of the thematic areas, each white paper first recalls what the 2013 report had concluded, and then the new information is reviewed against that. This helped the committee understand the relevance and importance of the new material and again highlighted areas for future research. The results of its follow-up work found no major challenges to the 2013 report. The white papers were again shared in Japan at events in Iwaki, Minamisoma, and Izuwakumatsu City, and all of these reports are translated into Japanese and are available for download from UNSCEAR's website. So let me recall a little about the sequence of the releases in the early days following the accident. The animation you see on the screen is a graphic display of how dispersion between 11 and 31 March 2011 was predicted using modelling. As you know, there was some reliance on models in the early days following the accident in order to estimate doses. The 2 most significant radionuclides released to the atmosphere from the perspective of exposure were radioiodine and cesium. On the basis of the reviews of new information reported in the white papers, it was concluded that the new published estimates of releases were broadly consistent with the 2013 report, although some variation in time in space was confirmed. It was also reconfirmed that other radionuclides other than those considered are not major contributors. Overall, through the review of the white papers, was that the updates do not significantly influence the public dose estimates overall. Thus, we can say that the overall picture remains unchanged. But new information was identified that could refine the estimates, particularly for some groups or components of the dose estimates, and reduce and improve the understanding of the uncertainties. I will also note one important issue that has been of concern, and that is whether there is an increase in thyroid cancer. There have been reports of an increased incidence of thyroid cancer among young people in Fukushima Prefecture, but the evidence presently is that this is not due to radiation exposure, but rather to the screening effect. The screening phenomenon, whereby rates appear to rise with intensive screening campaigns, is well known and documented worldwide. We can see this perhaps best from the screening study in 3 unexposed Japanese prefectures, where they mimicked the screening protocol used in Fukushima Prefecture and also found very elevated rates of thyroid nodule and thyroid cancer, similar to those found in the Fukushima study. The reason for the screening effect is that small thyroid cancers in the general population are already present but are not normally detected. Intensive and highly sensitive screening detects these small cancers, and rates appear to rise. In Fukushima, the reported excess cases occurred too soon after exposure to be due to radiation. Moreover, the distribution of thyroid cancers with age at exposure does not match the experience from the Chernobyl accident. In Chernobyl, by 2006, a total of 6,000 thyroid cancers had been detected. The peak incidence rate was observed 10 to 12 years after the accident. Perhaps half of these cancers were of a spontaneous nature, while the other half were due to high thyroid doses from drinking milk containing radioiodine. At its 65th session in 2018, the committee considered a project plan to produce a new report on Fukushima. The aim was to produce a report setting out a summary of all information available to the end of 2019 on the levels and effects of radiation exposure due to the accident, and the implications of the new information for the UNSCEAR 2013 Fukushima report. The committee reviewed progress at its 66th session in June 2019 and further reviewed the scope of the project to also provide an updated, detailed analysis of doses to the public. The committee expected that the technical document would be submitted to the committee at its 67th session in July 2020, with a view to its approval at that time. This project is now coming to closure and comprised over 30 experts from 12 countries and 1 international organisation. The expert group has reviewed over 1,000 peer-reviewed articles in preparation of its report that was considered by the committee at its 67th session. So as noted earlier, the 67th session had originally been scheduled for July 2020, but as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic was postponed from July to November, a session that was, for the first time in the committee's 64-year history, held online from the 2nd to the 6th of November. The committee did review the draft report in July 2020 and reported on progress in a note to the General Assembly. Specifically, the committee noted that a lot more information had been made available on the occurrence of radionuclides in the environment, in particular on concentrations of released radionuclides in air as a function of time and their physicochemical forms. So I am pleased to advise that the committee considered the UNSCEAR 2020 Fukushima report for approval in early November 2020 and now anticipate this approval to be confirmed by the end of November. During our review of the report, the committee did note that the update to the 2013 report enabled earlier estimates of public radiation doses to be improved and uncertainties to be reduced and better understood. This was because the update takes account of Japanese-specific conditions and important information, including measurements in people and the environment that were not available for the 2013 report. Consideration of remediation actions on dose reduction in the evacuated zones were also discussed, as was the effect of high precision screening on the frequency of pediatric thyroid cancer. Finally, the committee discussed the appropriate use of collective dose estimates in the context of the Fukushima accident. In summary, we can conclude that the findings of the 2013 UNSCEAR report have been broadly supported by new scientific research that has emerged since, and this has been captured to date in the committee's white papers up to 2017. There were some interesting scientific developments that needed further follow-up, but on the whole, the larger picture remains unchanged, that being that the estimated doses received by the Japanese public remain low. While there may be some minor changes taking into account new information, uncertainties and variability, it remains unlikely that we will see any discernible increase in cancer rates in the future. All of our publications so far, the UNSCEAR 2013 report and supporting fact sheet, UNSCEAR white papers and booklet for public on radiation are all available for free download in both English and Japanese. So as outlined in my presentation today, the committee has also undertaken work commenced in 2018 to update the UNSCEAR 2013 report. And while I would have liked to have been able to report more to you the outcomes of the UNSCEAR 2020 report, the pandemic has impacted this report finalisation and is only just in the final clearance process. I am, however, pleased to advise that the UNSCEAR 2020 report on the Fukushima accident is expected to be published and launched by UNSCEAR in the first quarter of 2021 before the 10th anniversary. UNSCEAR outreach in Japan to discuss in detail the UNSCEAR 2020 findings is tentatively scheduled for 10th to 18 May 2021, but will be subject to the ongoing pandemic situation. So in conclusion, and coming back to the theme of this conference, the radiological protection lessons from Fukushima, I would first like to recall that UNSCEAR is an independent UN scientific committee and that our mandate is to focus on the science, sources and exposures, health effects and mechanisms associated with radiation. As part of the process of putting together the white papers, and indeed the 2013 report and 2020 report, as scientists and as experts, the committee has also noted many other important issues that are not part of its mandate. The Chernobyl experience has taught us that there are many other factors that are at play, and these factors have again been identified in Japan. The most important aspect is the psychological impact of the accident. Being uprooted, living in temporary housing, worrying about the future, livelihoods being lost, worry about the children. These are all concerns. UNSCEAR is aware of these impacts and continues to raise them appropriately with relevant international organisations. It remains the committee's mandate within future efforts to make contributions about the impact of exposure to radiation. The scientific committee believes it is also important to note the importance of measurement data, measurement of radiation in people and the environment, that is taken as soon as possible during and after an accident, in order to make as realistic as possible dose estimates. In our UNSCEAR 2013 report, there was a higher reliance on modelling data for certain population groups, and we know that this tends to make dose estimates more conservative. Additional data available for the 2020 report, including data provided by Minamisoma City and Naraha Town that has been made available for our follow-up report, has been incredibly important for refining the dose estimates and reducing uncertainties. Finally, the importance of understanding baseline cancer rates, in particular for thyroid cancer in children, should be noted. Thank you for inviting me to share this information with you today, and I encourage you all to explore the information available on UNSCEAR's website on the impacts of the Fukushima accident, and I look forward to the publication of the UNSCEAR 2020 report in early 2021. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Peter Johnson. I'm the Director of Radiation Transport and Waste Safety at the International Atomic Energy Agency. I'm going to talk today about remediation of the environment and assistance to the Fukushima Prefecture. That's going to involve me talking about the IAEA guidance on recovery after nuclear accidents and our support to member states. The IAEA has a statutory role in the protection of the environment. Under our statute, we have a role to establish or adopt standards for safety, for protection of health, and the minimisation of danger to life and property, and to provide for the application of these standards. This is further elaborated in the IAEA requirements, which provide for appropriate protection of the environment from the harmful effects of radiation, and the need to be able to demonstrate rather than to assume that the environment is being protected. The IAEA has had a very long relationship with the ICRP. It dates back to 1963, and looking through our archives, we managed to find this statement which exemplifies the importance that the IAEA holds for the ICRP. So, to the safety standards and guidance which integrates protection of the public and the environment. So, the key requirements document which is of importance today is General Safety Requirements Part 3, otherwise known as International Basic Safety Standards. This is a requirements document designed to be incorporated into the law of member states. It's supported by a range of guidance documents, the most important of which is probably GSG 8, Radiation Protection of the Public and the Environment, and two other documents which are near to publication, the first being Source Monitoring, Environmental Monitoring, and Individual Monitoring for Protection of the Public and the Environment, which has got its temporary number DS505, and remediation strategy and process for areas affected by past activities or events, which will be GSG 15 when it's published. We also have a technical document which is currently under development, Remediation Strategies to Reduce Doses. The objective of this document is to provide guidance on the development of situation-specific remediation strategies in urban and rural areas for a wide range of environmental conditions. It's intended to be used by regulatory bodies, operators and others responsible for remediating sites and, in the case of an accident, contributing to the recovery process. Our activities in the environment are very heavily supported by modelling activities, and a major project supporting modelling is called Madaria. Madaria has gone through several stages, the current stage being Madaria 2. Madaria stands for Modelling and Data for Environmental Radiological Impact Assessment, and it includes models for a range of situations, including existing exposure situations and remediation. So let's move along to remediation and existing exposures after accidents. There is significant global interest to ensure strategies are in place to undertake remediation activities that could be necessary following a nuclear or radiological accident in order to reduce doses. The IAEA report on the Fukushima Daiichi accident recognised the importance of pre-accident planning for post-accident recovery to improve decision-making in a timely manner, and establishment of further international guidance on the practical application of safety standards for radiation protection in post-accident recovery situations. The IAEA has long-standing cooperation with the Fukushima Prefecture on radiation monitoring and remediation. This is in fact covered by two sets of projects. The first set of projects, which are called cooperation projects, were identified by the IAEA, and the second set of projects, which are called initiative projects, were identified by the Fukushima Prefecture. And you'll see that they're linked, they're connected projects. So under the cooperation projects or the cooperative projects, we have remediation and decontamination, the management of radioactive waste, and mapping and monitoring. Under the initiative projects, we have the dynamics of radionuclides in the environment and decontamination technologies, waste incineration, and surveys of wild animals and surveys undertaken by walking. These projects are the subject of formal agreements between the IAEA and the Prefecture. The individual activities under the cooperation agreements include the development of safety assessments for temporary storage sites for waste, the development of communication material to provide understandable information of monitoring results, the development of criteria to ensure safe access to non-residential areas, the provision of guidance on cleaning up publicly accessible areas, residential areas, guidance on cleaning water systems, rivers, lakes, streams, their banks, and so on. The provision of advice on the design of monitoring locations, guidance on the safe handling and retrieval of waste, and the sustainable management of temporary storage sites. Forests are an incredibly important part of the Fukushima Prefecture. They represent 70% of the surface area of the prefecture. And the air dose rate in these forests is declining at a much faster rate than the physical half-lives of the radionuclides that are present there. The main radionuclide that's present is cesium-137, and as you can see from the graph, the dose rate has reduced by more than 80% since March 2011, and this is due to natural processes. There's also a rich array of wildlife in these forests, which include boar, bear, deer, hare, and a range of birds. The highest concentrations in these animals is actually in boar, with concentrations up to 15,000 becquerels per kilogram, and there's also high concentrations in fish found in areas with the highest local contamination. Some differences between what one finds in Japan and what one finds in Europe are that the diet of the wild bear doesn't seem to contain a large fraction of fungi as it might do in the European environment. The fish situation is quite interesting because of the high seasonal rainfalls in the Japanese environment. One finds that a lot of the rivers are almost disappearing in the drier times of the year, and so the fish have quite large ranges, which has a profound impact on the concentrations of radioactivity in different species. There have been some interesting demonstration projects One in particular, which I want to mention, is at Satayama, and this is Satayama is marginal land between the forests and the living areas of people, and in these areas there's been the thinning of trees and the removal of soil, and in particular the removal of the leaf litter associated with the trees. And it's this removal of the soil and the leaf litter which has reduced the local contamination significantly and allowed these areas to be usable by the local populations for a range of leisure activities. The remediation decisions here were driven by societal factors and the ability of the local people to be able to use these areas rather than strict radiation protection aspects. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and bye.
Thank you very much to both Gillian and Peter for their presentations, letting us know about the important work of UNSCEAR and the International Atomic Energy Agency on recovery. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties we've had during the conference so far on interpretation. Our plan is to fix this for the recording that we'll put online after this session. So if you've been relying on interpretation and had some trouble, difficulty, understanding, please come back and have a listen to the recording that will go online tomorrow. Next up in the agenda is a live presentation from William Magwood. He's Director General of the Nuclear Energy Agency of the OECD. He's speaking to you live from the US on post-accident recovery, lessons learned, and future considerations.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to begin by thanking the ICRP and JAEA for inviting me to participate today. It is truly sad for me to not be in Fukushima Prefecture personally, to see the people there. I've visited Fukushima for many years since the accident. At the time, I was a commissioner with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and have interacted with senior officials across Japan as we have worked to recover from this terrible tragedy. And I will say that it's a tragedy that I think the entire international community bears some responsibility, and it's one that I think we all must work together with people in Japan to make sure that Fukushima Prefecture fully recovers and moves forward into the future. I'd like to begin my remarks today by thanking members of the NEA staff, Jacqueline Garnier-Laplace, who helped with the presentation today. And I also want to pay special recognition to Dr. Ted Lazo, who I know many of you, particularly at ICRP, are very familiar with, who retires from the NEA after 27 years of service, effective today, actually. So if Ted, you're listening, thank you very much for all of your service. So let me start with the first slide by giving you a very quick overview of the NEA itself. The NEA is an association. If you go to the next slide, please. The NEA is an association of 33 governments. The governments that comprise the NEA are those that bring forth the greatest expertise in areas related to nuclear safety, stakeholder engagement, radiation protection, nuclear law, and many other areas of technology and policy related to nuclear technology. Our member countries include the United States, Japan, France, many other advanced countries, but we also work very closely with strategic partners such as China, India, Brazil, and United Arab Emirates. Our framework revolves around high-level committees, people who come from their member governments at the highest levels to discuss issues associated with nuclear technology and policy. One of our committees is the Committee on Radiological Protection and Public Health. which has been the core body that has overseen much of our work in the areas that I'll be talking about today. Next slide, please. The NEA framework also includes research projects. We are very active in many areas of research on technical and scientific issues, particularly associated with nuclear safety and radiation protection. And much of the work that we have done in recent years has been influenced quite heavily by the next slide, which is the accident at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. It's now been, if you go to the next slide, please, it's now been almost 10 years since the accident. It's one that has had a huge impact, both in Japan and around the world. It's one that I have been involved with from the very beginning. As I mentioned, I was with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission the day of the accident, and we worked very closely with the Japanese authorities and industry to recover from the immediate crisis, but also to move forward into the future to learn lessons from the accident and to make sure that we could assure the public around the world that no such accident would ever happen again. When the accident occurred, the NEA brought its expertise together to assess the accident, to understand what it meant. If you go to the next slide, the first thing I think that we learned after careful analysis and bringing experts from around the world was that nuclear power plants are safe, that nuclear power plants are well regulated, effectively built, and well operated. However, that the accident itself showed that there were lessons to be learned. And the biggest lesson I think that has been learned around the world is that nuclear plants need to have more resilience to extreme events. The Fukushima Daiichi accident, which was precipitated by the earthquake and tsunami, was an extreme natural event, but it's one that with better planning and better preparation could have been resisted. And there are examples in Japan itself where power plants observe conditions very much like that of the Fukushima Daiichi plant that survived the accident quite well. So now, since the accident, there has been a tremendous effort over the last 10 years to increase that resilience. And also to learn how human aspects of safety are important in nuclear safety. This latter part, human aspects, is something I think there's still work to be done. And it's an area the NEA has been pursuing for the last several years and has focused tremendously on issues such as safety culture, training, human capacity, but also stakeholder engagement and issues associated with that. These are areas we're still working on. One thing I will note is that the NEA, in cooperation with experts around the world, is at this time developing what I believe will be one of our last reports on the Fukushima Daiichi accident, which is going to be released around the time of the 10-year point of the accident, that will focus on not what happened and not how we immediately reacted to the accident, but really on where we go from here, what we learned about the accident we will take into the future. This report will be released probably in the February timeframe, and you'll be able to download it from the NEA website. All of our work is available free of charge from the NEA website. Please feel free to go there to download documents at your leisure. Now, two other areas that I think we learned where there's tremendous activity going on today, or be the focal point of my presentation. The fact that offsite emergency preparedness needs to be modernized. The truth is, we've known this for quite some time. ICRP and many other institutions have made the observation that we need to take a careful look at how we do emergency preparedness. But I think the Fukushima Daiichi accident gave us a very live demonstration of why that is. And I'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. Also, the accident showed us that we need to have a greater focus on post-accident recovery management. And this is something where we are still learning a lot of lessons. And so I congratulate ICRP for assembling this discussion at this conference over the next few days to explore areas such as this in greater detail. If you go to the next slide, I'll start with offsite emergency preparedness and the modernization that we must see. The one thing you know about evacuations is evacuations kill people. Every evacuation, not just related to radiological events, but hurricanes and other natural disasters, almost invariably cause the death of innocent people. So while it may seem like a very important positive action for authorities to take to immediately evacuate people, it should be something that is done only when absolutely essential. Evacuations, we find, are unsafe for many populations, particularly patients in hospitals and nursing homes, people who are vulnerable. It's something that is extremely important to recognize, and something that unfortunately doesn't often get reflected in emergency preparedness plans. But we now believe that there's enough evidence that we have to do something. When you think about the elderly people who died as a result of evacuation after the Fukushima Daiichi accident, which is highlighted in this article from Preventive Medicine, it's a sad reality. So what we think the main lessons are that you have to consider the specific actions taken in regard to vulnerable groups, such as elderly people, and balance the risk of immediate evacuation against the possible benefits of simply sheltering in place, leaving people where they are and observing and making sure they have access to care. Now, don't ignore the fact that there are resources available beyond the government. There are local hospitals, there are other authorities, there are neighbors that can help support people who are sheltered in place. Importantly, it's critical that we find a more effective way to communicate risk to the public. People, when they hear there's a nuclear accident, are afraid, and their first instinct is to run away, to get as far away from the accident as possible. That may not be the right thing to do, but in order to help them understand what the right thing to do is, we have to find a way to communicate the risk to them more effectively. To answer that basic question, am I safe? And answer that clearly and often during the course of an accident. And then to be able to weigh the necessary protective action after that. That is something that we will have to do, and that is something that's essential. The next slide highlights another area, which we heard about from other speakers earlier today. I think UNSCAR highlighted this in their presentation, and that is taking into account the mental health aspects of nuclear accidents. The NEA has contributed to the development of the World Health Organization framework for mental health and psychosocial support in radiological and nuclear emergencies. And we have explored this in recent webinars to look into how the experience of the Fukushima Daiichi plant and other incidents and non-nuclear events, including the COVID-19 pandemic, can help countries improve their mental health preparations in the event of radiological emergencies. There's now an expert group that's supplementing under the NEA, that's now supplementing the WHO guidelines by developing practical, feasible approaches to integrate these impacts into decision making. And this is a very important area. We have observed and we have seen lots of data that shows us that even 10 years after the Fukushima Daiichi accident, there's still a tremendous mental health and psychosocial impact that needs to be dealt with. I have seen it myself. I have talked to people who've been mentally impacted and are still emotionally upset by what happened. And it's something that I believe will go on for many years. So we have to recognize these effects, and we have to make sure that we're prepared for them. Next slide highlights that we have to develop methods for balancing these health risks with evacuation and other actions with indirect consequences, including mental health issues. And as I mentioned earlier, this comes back to the issue of risk communication. And if we're able to take all these areas into account, we'll be able to integrate the mental health and other issues into our emergency preparedness plans. This should be part of the overall picture. This paper we've issued on lessons learned from non-nuclear crises highlights the fact that we can integrate these factors together and incorporate them into national and local plans. This will be, I think, part of the modernization that we have to undergo when it comes to emergency preparedness. And I think this will be very important to the future. The next slide highlights the second major area, which is a greater focus on post-accident recovery management. This is very complex, and I have been in many discussions over the last few years on this subject and found that even experts who work on this very closely debate the issues very intensely because it brings together expertise in different areas that don't normally work together. But what we're finding is we have to bring all these aspects together in order to deal with the human societal dimensions that are impacted in the aftermath of an accident. We have to embed the actions and measures necessary to sustain life and work after an accident. This is something we don't normally think about. When there's an accident, you want to respond, you want to move people out of harm's way, you want to make sure the health and the environment is protected, but you don't give a lot of thought to what happens 5 years later or 10 years later. How do you assure that you've taken actions that will make it easy for people to go back home or to go back to work and get back into their lives? This is really essential. And I think it's something that must be integrated into these plans in the future. Now, there must also be decisions during the early phases to minimize implications of the recovery process. Now, again, this is something we're not doing today, but it must be part of the future. And I think it's essential that we take those steps today. Next slide highlights a key area of work that we're currently doing at the NEA, which is development of a generic framework for post-accident recovery preparedness. And this is something that will be adaptable to specific national circumstances. Yes, we're learning from Japan, but we're taking this experience that we have seen in Japan and applying it on a generic basis that can be applied around the world. And the framework that we're putting together will clarify roles and responsibilities and highlight how different organizations and stakeholders, but at every level of the country, local, regional, and national, can work together. We also highlight requirements for legislation to allow implementation for recovery actions. But most importantly, we focus on stakeholder engagement and the establishment of communication strategies to support the restoration of social life during the recovery phase. Next slide, please. I believe the easiest way to talk about this is to note that we have to bring the public into the decision-making process. And it's vital to involve a wide range of stakeholders in that process and provide insights on how to build national and community resilience to minimize social disruption and facilitate recovery. Those who are working in the ICRP environment and radiological protection overall are probably going to recognize that this is very much like what we talk about in terms of optimization. Next slide, please. Now, this came out of a workshop that we held in Japan in February. It's one of the very last workshops that was actually conducted before the pandemic that we did at the NEA. And it really is about the same sort of discussion that we see in optimization, bringing trust into the process and making sure there's a shared understanding of the situation, its evolution, and implications for all parties to make sure that the preparedness strategy includes actions targeted to the resilience of society and engaging local communities. And I think the ICRP co-expertise process will be a tremendous help in achieving this. So as we go through these processes, thinking about this in terms of optimization, I think is really the right direction to take because we are going to be focusing on optimization at the NEA going forward. Next slide, please. In order to exercise this, we're going to be conducting an international nuclear emergency exercise, INEX 6, in the next year or so, that will incorporate for the first time recovery management. And this is really something that's quite exciting. We've done these exercises over a long period of time, but this is the first time we've brought in these factors. And we're going to look at the efficacy of mental health and psychosocial support. We're going to look at risk communications. We're going to look at scenarios combining multiple stressors. And most importantly, we're going to talk about the stakeholder engagement part of this. And this is something that will help us find the ways to modernize the decision-making principles using optimization as we try to move forward into the future. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this is really about optimization, and optimization and protection needs to evolve behind just radiological protection, but to be the optimization of well-being. This, I think, is one of the great lessons of Fukushima Daiichi. This can be achieved by exploring among various options to improve decision makers' response to stakeholders' needs and concerns. Approaches and tools are needed to appropriately balance these approaches in managing diverse risks. Now, it's important to note that there'll never be a one-size-fits-all approach to this. This is going to be complex, and the best we can do really from an international standpoint is to look at best practices and to perhaps create frameworks for decision-making. But the decisions are going to be very different from situation to situation. And of course, those familiar with optimization will recognize that that's true in all these cases. There'll be a new normal designed according to the outcome and the desires of the stakeholders. Now, I'm very pleased to highlight that the NEA will hold its third stakeholder involvement workshop looking at this at the end of 2021. And perhaps just as we did for our second stakeholder engagement workshop, we may invite people from Fukushima Prefecture to come and share their experiences. So moving to my last slide, I'll simply summarize by saying that there really are three major challenges for the future. And one of those, I think, most important, and I think everyone who is speaking here today would agree with this, is sharing the experience and lessons learned from the recovery process in Fukushima Prefecture will be key to being able to modernize the processes around the world. And I think both people in Fukushima Prefecture will benefit from this as the international community engages and brings resources and expertise to Japan, but the rest of the world will also benefit from the experience gained through these processes. And if we're successful, we'll develop a multidimensional, multidisciplinary framework that will achieve a transparently accepted and sustainable decision-making process that balances various risks. And at the end, we'll be able to adapt these lessons into policies and regulations around the world. So I'll conclude by simply noting that in all things that we see in this area, trust is the key. Earning social trust through stakeholder involvement is really the path of the future. And we're seeing this not just in post-accident scenarios, but really in many regulatory and radiological protection areas around the world. And so it's really a pleasure to be able to speak with you and encourage you to continue the important work in Fukushima Prefecture and to know that the international community stands with the people of Fukushima Prefecture. So with that, I will conclude, and you can move to the last slide to have a nice picture of our building. Please visit us in Paris whenever we're allowed to fly again, and we'll invite you for a glass of wine. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill, for an excellent presentation covering a lot of ground on very important points on recovery. It says a lot about us, or reflected a lot already on the presentations made in this session, and in fact is a pretty good lead in to the very last presentation of this session being presented by the World Health Organization, Janat Kaur. She'll be talking about the framework for mental health and psychological support in radiological and nuclear emergencies. Janat, please go ahead.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, dear participants of the conference, this is Janat Kaur of the World Health Organization joining you from Geneva, Switzerland. It is a great honor for me to have this opportunity to contribute to this very important event, to deliver the words and to share information about our new document, which we are just about to launch. I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation of the ICRP for the work they are doing in relation to the Fukushima recovery. It's been really enormous contribution over 10 years, which created a very, very good connections, interfaces, and platforms for discussions, for engaging with affected people, with community, and creating new knowledge which is being shared with the global community. It is a very important contribution. Without a further delay, I will start my presentation right away. So the topic of my presentation today is the new WHO framework for management of mental health and psychosocial consequences of radiation emergencies. First of all, I would like to remind you the definition of health, which is very well known and everybody's familiar with it. But much less we know about the definition of mental health. So WHO defines this as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their own potential and can cope with stressful situations, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to the community. Keeping this in mind, let's look at the issue of mental health and psychosocial effects of emergencies and disasters. It is well known that any emergency, disaster, conflict, humanitarian crisis will affect people, and with time it will improve and it will pass. And we know that prevalence of common mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety can double or more in crisis situations. To the point of 1 person in 5 will be affected and will have one of these mental health problems and psychosocial problems as an impact of these events. We should also keep in mind that despite this tragic nature and adverse health effects on mental health, emergencies, they have shown to be opportunities to build or improve existing sustainable mental health systems for all people in need. Since 1992, the Interagency Standing Committee has been a unique forum for coordination, policy development, and decision-making with regard to humanitarian emergencies, involving the key UN and non-UN partners, intergovernmental international organizations, and NGOs. ICRP launched a mental health global action plan, so-called MHGAP. And MHGAP guidelines have been put in place in 2007. And these are the benchmark, the document which provides the firm foundation basis for developing a plethora of tools and guidances and policy advisories for managing mental health impact of various types of emergencies. WHO endorsed these guidelines, which are based on them, multiple derivative and consequential documents which address public health aspects of mental health and psychosocial support systems in emergencies. You can see the link at the bottom of my screen where the further information is available. WHO chairs the AASC reference group on mental health and psychosocial support in emergency settings, and develops advice and tools which are used by largest humanitarian organizations active in mental health field. WHO and partners published a range of practical tools and guidelines to meet these needs for both for responders and for people affected by emergencies. We know that in nuclear emergencies and radiological emergencies, there are some specifics which make mental health and psychosocial consequences of this type of emergencies somewhat slightly stand aside. This is fear of radiation, which is often due to lack of knowledge and also misleading information sometimes happening in mass media. It's exposure to stress, which is related to implementation and consequences of protective actions in emergencies, such as evacuation, relocation, long-term displacement, or, for example, restrictions on food products, on drinking water. This all contributes to the stress and anxiety of people, and also the deterioration of social and economic consequences in the specific area. And we've also seen such phenomena as a stigmatization of affected people. That's been reported in various types of emergencies, but also after Chernobyl and Fukushima emergencies. Looking back, we have very well documented knowledge base about psychosocial consequences of nuclear detonations, as been seen after the explosions in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There are reports documenting Many of post-traumatic stress disorder cases occurred after these explosions, and also after natural disasters such as floods, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. And further on, we've been seeing a well-documented impact of psychosocial consequences of Chernobyl. Today is being considered as the largest documented health impact, which was not due to direct impact of radiation exposure, but indirect impact of the consequences of the accident. Similar effects we've seen after Fukushima emergency nuclear accident. There are numerous reports documenting these consequences, including high level of anxiety, of post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic stress, and increased rates of suicide. We've also seen social stigma attached to people relocated from affected areas, including cases of bullying children at schools, etc. We've also seen in the beginning of the health survey of Fukushima population some reluctance from people to get engaged into this survey in order to avoid being labeled as people affected by the accident and to avoid the stigmatization. So what do we have today in terms of preparedness and response to radiological nuclear emergencies? There is a well-developed, strong and firm basis, so-called international system of radiation emergency preparedness and response, which is based on evidence, on knowledge, on very strong documented effects by the UNSCEAR, the reports of ICRP, and there is one image missing here, I'm sorry about that. Safety standards developed jointly by IAEA and various UN organizations, including WHO, which provide a formal basis for setting up preparedness and response systems and recovery as well. In parallel, we have also international guidance, normative and policy advice documents for managing mental health in emergencies and disasters. What the problem is that these two areas are existing in parallel with very little interaction and cross-fertilization between them two. So the question raises how we can manage this problem, how we can bring these two areas together. WHO has been advocating for this through scientific publications, through discussions at different international fora with specialists and experts. There's a list of these events where we presented the WHO views, you can see on this slide. And we also, during this year, obviously being limited in travel restrictions, we been actively involved in a number of webinars, continuing advocating for the issue and creating a momentum for taking this issue forward. So as a result of all this work, 2 years ago, the WHO and the Nuclear Energy Agency of the OECD launched the joint project for addressing non-radiological health effects and impacts of radiation emergencies. The project consists of two distinct components, and first components being the development of the WHO framework, and this is the document which I'm presenting today to you. The policy framework, which will be using existing WHO guidelines and interagency standing committee guidelines and adapting them to the nuclear emergency settings. The second component of the project will be further taking this work towards development practical tools and solutions based on the framework developed by the WHO. So this is a timeline, how we worked on the document. We developed the first draft, and it was subjected to the thorough review, several rounds of reviews. And today we are at the very, very last stage of this process. We're launching the document on 27th of November. The structure of the document is presented here. There are chapters addressing the overall overarching elements. For example, cross-cutting issues which apply throughout the entire emergency cycle, and we call them 5 C's. These are coordination, communication, capacity building, community engagement, and core ethical principles. These are 5 C's. And also then we talk in the document in the special separate sections on community interventions at preparedness phase, at response phase, and in the recovery phase. We also elaborate on challenges in the implementation of the framework, and we list the research needs which are still needed in this specific field. The framework applies this classic pyramid of interventions for managing psychosocial impact, which applies to any types of health emergencies. The pyramid starts at the bottom from the very broad and low level, let's say, interventions, which are applicable to any type of setting, any type of emergencies, and require least resources to be implemented. And then the pyramid goes towards more focused and more targeted services, which also, if we look at the costs involved, the top of the pyramid is the highest cost, requires highest costs, and also the frequency of the need is lowest at that point. Whereas at the bottom, the types of interventions starting from self-care, from people helping each other, at that level, the costs are the lowest and the frequency of the need is the highest. So a few words about the 5C. To elaborate on that, we know that coordination is the key issue in any for any emergency preparedness and response. This is also very well consistent with the international radiation safety standards, JS Part 7, which also emphasizes the need of cross-sector coordination in planning and responding to nuclear emergencies. This is also consistent with the international health regulations, which bring cross-sector coordination to the top of the requirements for efficient health emergencies response. Communications is a very important component, especially today in the age of digital and social media and digital communications. As never before, communication is important and prominent and powerful. Community engagement is also an extremely important component which applies through the entire emergency cycle, and I want to commend ICRP once again for its tireless efforts in engaging into dialogues with the community, with the affected community in Fukushima, and setting the example and precedent of how this can be done effectively. The best part of this is when affected people are engaged in these dialogues, when they involved in the development of information products. This provides the shared sense of ownership of these information products and increases the trust into the sources of this information. Capacity building is extremely important to any sector, any settings, and there is no really need to elaborate on that. It is a well-known and important component. And applying core ethics principles. Excuse me, this is my alarm reminding that my time running out for this presentation. I'm going to wrap up very shortly. So core ethical principles are similar to the ones applied by ICRP, and also in addition to that, in the mental health and psychosocial settings, we should also keep in mind that care should be taken to ensure the primacy of community needs and protection from exploitation, abuse, and discrimination, and to take into account the local cultural settings and values which should be respected and confidentially maintained. These are key messages, and this is the last slide of my presentation as a summary, let's say, of this talk, that we know that radiation emergencies have unique mental health impacts and features, and a public health approach with an emphasis on mental health and psychosocial support interventions is essential for improving and strengthening existing radiation emergency philosophy and structure. There is still need for further research for certain aspects of these And I think together, joining our forces with the whole global community and international partners and national partners, we can really achieve the goal of improving the existing system of emergency preparedness, response, and recovery after nuclear accidents. Thank you very much for your attention, and my apologies for running over the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anat, for reminding us of this extremely important aspect of overall well-being that's often overlooked and is particularly important in recovery after nuclear accidents. And thank you to all our presenters for this opening session, and for everyone in attendance for your patience with our technical difficulties, which I'm sure will be sorted out for the next session. We'll be taking a bit of a break now before the next live stream session begins. I remind you that any questions that we were not able to get to in this session will be put online for speakers to respond to. And please do go online tomorrow when the live stream recording is available of this session, and you may add additional questions as well. And finally, please log off of this session before you try to join the next one. It's a different link. Please find the information on the website. Thank you.